Welcome to Critical Hit, a Major Spoilers podcast. Thank you so much for downloading, listening, sharing this episode with a friend, and of course, following in our adventures all these many weeks. And this is our wrap-up episode to Weird Western. And Sam, let me just say, that was an incredible adventure.
Thank you. I'm really glad that you enjoyed it.
I think all of us enjoyed it, but I especially enjoyed it. I always love the weird and the Western and the punching with Western monk fists. And so here's a question that I have for you guys, just real quick. Because, and maybe it's because of my class, I know Rodrigo had a lot of additions to do on some of his powers, but everyone's talking about how crunchy and math involved in Pathfinder, and I guess I just didn't see it.
Part of it was you had the character builder set up most of your math for you. So you didn't see all the background crunch that was in there.
Part of it I had to set it up.
Yeah, you had to put all of it in there, but it did all the actual
stats for you.
Yeah, back in the day, we had to add up our own numbers.
Right. Part of it was you did have one of the more straightforward.
Right. That's what my thought was.
Not necessarily straightforward characters, but as far as in combat changes, yours was one of the most straightforward, whereas mine's the opposite end with Barbarian. Barbarians have kind of a constant set of stat changes because of rage and...
Okay, well then that brings up another question then. In this day and age when we have character builders, when we have Roll20, and I know I'm not saying it's everybody, but it seems like a majority of our listeners who are playing role-playing games are not using traditional dice and pen and paper or pencil and paper because everyone makes mistakes. Why then are people still complaining about Pathfinder?
So it really depends on the characters. There are certain things that even fairly sophisticated systems aren't going to be able to do the math for you with. Like, one of the reasons I gave Matthew Pet is because the normal build of Fey Blood Sorcerer has spell focus, and I didn't want him to have to deal with trying to calculate his DCs for enchantments versus like other schools. And that's the kind of thing that people tend to have to remember, and that sometimes I feel like people aren't happy with having to remember.
Okay, because I gotta say, my experience with this system was just fine. I rather enjoyed it. Matthew, what about you?
This, comparatively, and I'm not going to get into Edition Wars, and I don't, don't at me, bro. But I think that this, compared to what we did, especially with 5th edition, this feels like an automatic or a manual transmission as opposed to an automatic transmission. You have to remember to clutch, but once you actually, start getting in the habit of remembering to clutch, it's not that big a deal. But the people who don't clutch, don't know how to clutch, and have never learned how to clutch, sometimes will look at it and go, that seems like it's way too much crap. I don't even want to deal with it, or I don't like it, or I didn't like it. I did it and I crashed into a tree. Because I had terrible experiences with 3rd edition, and I had a less but still not pleasant experience rather with 3.5. But Pathfinder just, I don't know, it seemed like it's fine once you actually remember that sometimes you got to do a thing.
It honestly, it might also have been the people you were playing with, not because I think,
following my other friends' douches.
I mean, it's not necessarily that they weren't, whether they were nice or not. What I'm saying is, we all here, specifically on Critical Hit, we spend a lot of time kind of looking out for each other's stats, just specifically so that this stuff doesn't happen. Both the dungeon master, whoever happens to be the dungeon master, and also we all like spend some amount of time being like, hey, remember I put a thing on you, or remember somebody else put a thing on you, or whatever.
Right.
And here's the part where everyone can go over to iTunes and leave the comment. This guy won't ever stop comparing Dungeons and Dragons to Pathfinder, but I found a lot of similarities between the two systems, 4.0 and 3.5.
They're super similar systems. Like they use the core of 3.5.
Right, but like even down to like some of Matthew's spells, I was like, oh, he's using this. It's going to do this.
Yeah, no, like Pathfinder, is not its own thing.
Right, I know it's
It
using
is-
the D20, but there are certain things that are owned by Wizards of the Coast that can't be used in other systems.
Yeah,
Well,
And-
it can.
Pathfinder is using all of those. Like 3.5 was an open
Oh,
Gaming
right.
license.
Oh, okay,
open
okay,
gaming
okay.
license. So
Yeah.
Pathfinder just took that, improved upon the formula.
Basically, the only things that they can't use are like very specific names,
Right.
like Mordenkainen and
Right,
Yeah,
right,
or and
Bixby
certain specific monsters that are patented, like mind flayers and beholders.
which I guess Illithid is still okay.
I think
Or-
Illithid's the part that's patented because Mind Flayer is a monster in
Final
like
Fantasy.
tons of video games.
Well,
Oh,
that's
sure,
'cause
yeah, Illithid, whatever. The special like versions of mind flayers
Yeah.
that Wizards has created. Like
You can say
the-
devil, but you can't say tannery.
yes.
Yes, there you go.
Azitu.
Brian, did you have fun? You
I-
had some difficulties there in the last couple of episodes with your
Yeah,
character hitting.
And there's where I would have the issues with the system. The game was great. Sam is an amazing game master. That was all fun, but I'd say even despite having to have a specific archetype that fit the
Yeah, the venue,
concept
like, yeah.
I went with. It still felt like I had to take a lot of extraneous feats just to be competent at my gimmick.
So you're saying Batman's not competent.
Yeah, and I
No, Batman
deeply
has all those feats.
apologize for that. Like I think that some of that is on me, and that I wanted you when you came up with this concept. Like I thought the concept was so cool, but I really probably should have been more clear on one of the weaknesses of Pathfinder, and for that matter, 3.5, and honestly, for that matter, most role-playing games. Not all, but a lot of them, is that specialization is highly valued, and because the Hanging Judge was capable of doing so many things, he was never as good at any of them as a specialized character like, Eshin or Russell. So it's like, yeah, he could shoot and he could grapple and he could punch, but like he could not do any of those things as well as if he had focused on one of them. And I think that resulted in some him not being as effective as he could have been. And I'm sorry I didn't give you more guidance on that.
Well, I'm curious because we only played up to level 6, and in a lot of games, once you get past level 5, I guess it's at level 7 here, right? Or once you get past level 6 here, things start to improve for your characters. You start taking these different feats and paths that actually could help you, but maybe we didn't get that far. I mean, because, don't you have a lot more advantages and extras that you can add to your character if you're at, say, level 8 than where we were at level 6?
I mean, there's a constant progression, and it's certainly true that some characters kind of ebb and flow at various levels.
Mm-hmm.
So like I would say that Alder never got to be as powerful as he could have been later, because sorcerers, he just got his very first 3rd level spell, and when a sorcerer is actually capable of casting fireball, that's a huge game changer. And like similarly, like I feel like Shema would have eventually taken deadly aim, which would have like drastically increased his damage. And yeah, with some extra, which I know is already absurd considering his damage was great. But
But consider this. My class gave me that Bane ability, which adds 2d6 to my damage, which is huge, but that never increases. Like that never again increases.
Right.
So as the levels continue to go up, it's going to be, a working ability forever, right? That extra 2d6 of damage is never going to go away, but it's also never going to get any better.
Right.
So it's like at level 5 when I got it, it's huge. It's a huge amount of damage. It's a +2 to hit and a huge amount of damage. But as we level up, it actually becomes a progressively less significant ability.
Right.
It's just a huge jump at level 5.
Yeah. So what level did we start at? Did we all start at 1?
2.
2. Okay, so that was another question that I had is a lot of game systems that people play are just like, just skip the first 5 levels and just everybody start at level 5 because otherwise
do you
it's
even
just
have those levels.
Right.
Well, because some people like the NPC funnel or the low-level funnel that you get in some games.
Sure. And I mean, if you're going to start from the beginning, it's definitely it's a perfectly valid decision to say I'm going to start at 5 or I'm going to start at 1. But I think that it's a different experience, and having jumped back into Critical Hit at level 16 or 15 or whatever it was, it is an entirely different experience than starting out at that point, because there are actually powers that I don't have anymore that I've never used and don't actually remember what they are, because when we were going through the character creation, well, you did this and then you didn't do that anymore, and now you do this in the thing. So I would definitely say that if jumping in at 5 is sure, that's fine. But I kind of like that grind from the beginning, start out as a kindergartner baby with a sword.
Yeah, so do I. Here's the thing, though, Matthew. If you think it's difficult with a character sheet that you already have in front of you jumping back into the character, I'm trying to convert my character from the D&D Insider system into another character builder system. And holy crap, it's like, let me just put in all the points that I need at level 19 and then try to find and then add in all my spells. You'd think it would be that easy. No. I literally had to create a level 1 character, then add all of the XP for level 19, and then it would allow me to have access to all of the things that I would need to build my character. It was kind of stressful because I'm thinking, okay, what spells did I have, which ones dropped, and those kind of things. So yeah, I see where you're coming from, Matthew. Of jumping in at too high a level can be intimidating.
Yeah, and particularly since you guys hadn't played Pathfinder before, I really didn't want to start you guys off with too many things that you needed to keep track of. So that's why I started you off at level 2, because that way you're not incredibly fragile and terrible, but and then took you from 2 to 6. But yeah, I didn't want to just start you at, say, level 6.
Rob, what was your favorite part of this game?
Rob Smash.
Why?
No, I really enjoyed playing someone who didn't have to be involved with anything other than just point me at the thing and I'll kill it. And I really liked that. I did actually have my roommate for help with creating the character. He's been playing Pathfinder since Pathfinder became a thing.
Since before Pathfinder?
So yeah, since before Pathfinder, basically. But he never stopped playing Pathfinder, so he knew kind of where to go with certain things and how to set up so my progression wasn't going to be, lost as I picked the wrong things early on. So I was able to get just a fairly min-maxed character that worked for what I wanted to do.
Yeah, cool. Brian, what about you? What was your favorite part of the game?
It's a lot of stuff.
It's okay to say that you liked Alder.
Why are you laughing like that's a silly answer?
Because it is.
Hey, shut up.
Okay, let me rephrase that. It's okay to say that you like South Carolinians.
Oh, please, can we? What was with the accent? It was bothering me the entire game.
Okay, we're gonna do this now. All right, we'll do this.
That was a question I had down the list, but go ahead, Matthew.
Here's the deal with the accent. From the standpoint of why in character it's there, and when we were, when you were talking and we were going back and forth, and you're like, well, sometimes his mother would show up and he would go and learn things, and my thinking is, I remember being young and trying to learn 2 languages at once. And my expectation was that as he's learning 2 languages, he's not going to speak either one in a fashion that's normal. So I was trying to come up with a way that would imply that he's a little weird and that he did 2 things at once, and he's not particularly concerned about sounding right in either English or Sylvan. And then I came up with my character inspiration, and it clicked. And my character inspiration, when I was looking like, okay, well, what does he look like? What does he look like? I immediately hit on Peter McNichol. And if you don't know Peter McNichol, he was one of the lawyers from Ally McBeal. He was very young. He was in Dragon Slayer. But most importantly, he was Janosch from Ghostbusters 2.
Got it.
So Alder is taking a little bit of that weird Janosch accent and trying to do, and of course, this is very important, and you guys need to know this. My accent changed on the fly the second Rodrigo opened his mouth in character.
Ha!
And I
see.
cannot say for sure that the same thing happened in the other direction, but I suspect that we both had to kind of adjust what we were intending to do, because some of the things that I was like, well, he would say, no, I can't do that because then that sounds in Hamana. So yes, that was entirely what that was, as I was trying to convey a character who was in both worlds at the same time, and also have fun and talk like maybe a little like Janos, but not exactly.
Rodrigo, is there an inspiration for your character?
Yeah. So there was sort of a visual inspiration. There's a sort of a Mexican like kind of a traditional hero named Jose Maria Morelos, and the visual look for Chema comes from that guy, and that's the like white bandana and like overcoat comes from him, and that's about it. When I did probably make the accent a little bit marked when I realized that Matthew was doing an accent as well, because I was like, this is gonna get pretty ridiculous pretty fast if I do the accent as heavily as I was planning on doing it to begin with. But also it's hard. It's hard to maintain like a really heavy accent for a really long time. So I think Chema's accent does get lighter as we go.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, so that was visually that was kind of the thing, and as far as playing him, I just kind of trying to do a take on the lawman come to town.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm. The mysterious and handsome stranger.
Yeah.
Brian, what about you?
I can't say there's been any specific influences. I know I tried to not make my character, at least in his costume, too similar to V from V for Vendetta.
Oh, right. Mm-hmm.
But, so I kind of steered a bit away from that. I don't know. His civilian identity, I don't think I had a specific person in mind. I just kind of tried to go for a stereotypical Western dandy kind of guy.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Rob?
Rob Smash.
Yeah, pretty much.
Oh no,
Killer
Rob,
Croc?
you gave
Come
me a
on.
very specific inspiration. I don't know if you remember.
I threw a rock.
I don't remember the specific.
Almost got him.
Yours was great. It was I want to play Lizard Man Zuko.
Right, I forgot about that.
I see.
Forgot about that. Like, you were giving me some of the information on how you pictured the lizard folk, and that's when I figured Zuko was a really easy way to approach it for someone that's going to be very angry and very
Mm-hmm.
to the point.
Yeah. So Russell actually has inspiration in somebody that I used to know, who literally in like 1965 got beaten up in an alley in San Francisco when he was a kid.
Oh wow!
Yeah.
Crazy.
My friend Harold got beaten up in an alley in, I want to say it was 1965, and he woke up in a monk's monastery with these acupuncture needles all over his body as they were trying to take care of him.
Holy crap!
Yeah. And then, of course, he actually got reconnected with his parents, almost right away. It was about a day later, but got reconnected. But he ended up training with the monks for, I want to say, well past high school, because he was probably, like I said, 10 or something when this happened to him. And so he learned martial arts from them in San Francisco in the 1960s. And
How is there not a movie about this guy?
well, I mean, he's just Russell. I mean, he's just Harold. Just this guy. But no, he's a really cool guy, and he actually did work for a long time for a company that built software that many of your favorite movies from the late 80s and early 90s and television shows that may have involved spaceships in outer space. He worked for that company. Sadly, the last that I heard of him was 10 years ago. He was involved in a horrible accident, and this time literally lost his memory. He had no memory of anyone before his accident except for his parents.
Wow.
Yeah, and so I spent a year trying to track him down because I'd heard that he was in this accident, and other people that used to work for him was like, have you heard from him? And et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Finally tracked down his dad, explained who I was, and his dad said, well, I will ask him to see if he can remember you, and he didn't, so I never heard from him again. So, yeah.
That's really sad.
But that is the inspiration for Russell Street. So there you go.
Wow.
Yeah. Let's see. Matthew, what was your favorite part of the game? And it is okay if you say Alder.
Yeah, and I'm sorry, I cut Brian off. I think it's still technically his turn.
It's still technically Brian's
Brian.
turn. Okay.
Yeah, I'd probably have to go with the lizard folk.
You like the
They're
lizard
fun.
folk and their
Yes,
story?
the
Yeah.
kids and
I really enjoyed watching them ask.
Yeah.
It was fun times.
Yeah, it was. Matthew, now what about you?
Sam's NPCs sold the whole thing for me.
True.
And I love the fact that there were various Southern accents in play. There were definite times where she would speak and you'd be like, this character is male. I do not know who this character is yet, but this character is clearly male just entirely from the bearing and the acting that she put into it. It was really fascinating. And then we had that triple level fight where we fought, we fought the brothel, and then we fought the cowboy, and we fought the engineer. And I'm like, all three of these characters are Sam's voice, but just each one is such a unique character and so different because of the acting. It was fascinating. And I also loved playing dueling accents with Rodrigo. Because there are moments where I would start to speak and I would feel my accent drift and I would pause and then he would come in and I'd be like, wait, his accent is starting to drift. And it was wonderful and it was fun and it was just kind of a college improv moment for me that I really, really enjoy reliving just for a second. Because Alder was going to have a much thicker accent that had some flourishes that would have been very problematic trying to actually talk to Rodrigo in character. So that was fun.
Rodrigo, what was your favorite part of the Weird Western? And it's totally okay to say Russell. Yeah, it's totally okay to say Russell.
You should say something.
I mean, I did enjoy Russell. I mean, Russell was very enjoyable, and it probably was that it was kind of walking in and figuring out where everybody had decided to hang their trope hat. Walking into it, and also, so it was kind of like a twofold discovery process, right? One where everybody decided to walk in and say, okay, well, this is what I want to do. And also what part of that process Sam had been like, and this is how I'm going to hook you into the plot. Mm-hmm. Because I, as a game master, really enjoy that. And also, then later on figuring out what moment Sam did or in which way Sam did that, and at what moment that was like something that Sam, approached the player and said, okay, well, this is what's been happening in this section of the world, and here's your involvement of it. And at what point Sam was like, okay, well, would you like to have this cool thing about your character? And the player was like, yeah, that sounds good. And clearly that was her just like opening this door for them to walk through it like a sap,
wiggling that room
and
in front of you.
Yeah, and just like clearly connecting them to the plot in some way. And seeing that then play out and being like, oh yeah, this person had no idea that she had like, basically plugged them into the story and created this like very satisfying thing for them to be connected into and have some knowledge of. But I definitely did enjoy seeing everybody's choices into, because when you say like we're all going to play a space opera, or we're all going to play superheroes, or we're all going to play a western, these things that are very well known to us as nerds, and that are very rich in tropes. It is interesting to see what choices everybody makes, and what choices everybody doesn't make.
Mm-hmm. I'm actually a nerd king, which is 4 nerds whose tails got stuck together.
By the tail, yeah.
Yeah.
You know what my favorite part was?
Russell?
Was it Russell?
No. Sam, what year does this story take place in?
It takes place in 1880.
1880. 17 years before Dracula made his appearance in Bram Stoker's Dracula. So I got a kick out of that.
Clearly, Dracula was based.
I know, on this weird western, yeah.
On the evil Mr. Miller, yeah.
Yeah.
I gotta say, there's one thing that kind of like threw me off, because when Sam started sending us material, she had sent us some materials, and then later on she was like, what was it, like 1870, and then or 1880, and then she pushed it to 1890, and I was like, well, all my Mexican Revolutionary War stuff is like out the window. Just gotta go back and like redraft all this stuff.
Yeah, sorry, because I had an idea of like the Western setting goes off of a fairly wide span of time, and then I decided to stick this one based on a very specific actual world event that happened, and then that kind of set my time.
What was the actual real world event? The railroad connection?
Yeah, so the building of the Mexican-American Railroad, and specifically the murder of William Greenwood.
Oh, so that was the other thing that's kind of interesting, is you actually used some real-life stuff as the inspiration for some of the characters and events in this book.
Yep.
Or in this story.
So when... basically, so I wanted to make this all based on your characters, to start with the characters first and build the plot around them. And so 2 of the first characters I got were Chema and the hanging judge. And so I'm like, all right, well, we need to have this be like relatively close to Mexico to make it make any sense for a Mexican federale to be there. And we need a bad guy for the hanging judge to fight against. And so I was like, well, what are like classic Western bad guys? And then I started thinking of like the, robber baron, railroad tycoon. And so I was like, all right, well, let me look into the history of the Mexican-American Railroad. And that's how I found William Palmer. Who is a real person. I encourage everyone to go read his Wikipedia page, because aside from the fact that he was part of some secret society that fought ghosts, almost everything else I said about him was true. Like, the man was a cavalry officer for the Union. He got captured, got sent to like a notoriously terrible prison. He had a pregnant wife who had a heart attack. He built homes for freed slaves. He was a devout Quaker, and he built this railroad. And it was just like this little one line in his Wikipedia entry, which is that his chief engineer, who had also been with him in the war, was murdered in Mexico City in 1880. And I was just like, there's like no more information that I could find on what happened. But I was just like, well, that's it. That's the start of the story.
Now you know.
The Rainbow Star.
Ting!
Yeah, that's really cool when you were telling us about this like a week or so ago. And I was like, oh, that is so awesome that you can literally take, real history and just tweak it a little bit, add in some mysticism, throw in a couple dinosaurs and lizard men, and there you go. Real quick, Sam, what did you have a favorite part of this game? And it's okay to say that the GM was the best part of the game.
Honestly, I really just enjoyed watching you guys interact with the world and getting to run some combats for you. I really like running combats, and this kind of gave me the opportunity to put you in some weird, tricky situations and see what you made of them and how you dealt with them. But probably my favorite part was writing and then doing the cutscenes. I really enjoyed every part of those.
Now, Yeah, those were really good because they really served as good breaks and transitions into different parts of the story, so that we basically had a 3-act structure spanning 30 plus episodes, which was a lot of fun.
Thank you.
The next thing is how much collaboration went on behind the scenes, because I know that when I created my character, I was like, okay, here's my character sheet. You had me re-roll a bunch of things because you didn't believe me the first time, and I re-rolled even better the second time. But I said, here's my character's backstory, or here's what I'm thinking about my character, and you were like, okay, well, how about we add this, or how about you could do this? And so we kind of worked back and forth on, okay, here's some things. And then once that was done, you gave me, and I guess everybody, I don't know if we all got the same material, but basically we all had a giant info dump of here's what you know in order to get into the game.
Yeah. So there was a lot of prep work. I basically went back and forth with everyone. So I don't know if you want to reveal for yourself what I did for you, the what's in the box, or if you want me to share that.
Yeah, no, you can go ahead and share.
What's in the box?
So when you first pitched me an Amnesiac, I had no idea that this was based on a real character, but I was like, wow, an Amnesiac. Well, that's perfect because I can, it's a nice open door that I can use to connect you to plot. And I already had 2 humans, and you were pitching a third human, and I was like, I could do 3 humans and a lizard man and a half elf, but I could also do something a little bit more interesting. So Russell was technically a Dampier, but reflavored in this case to be effectively ghost-blooded. But the Dampier have the ability to detect undead, so that's what he was using throughout the game. And a lot of your story was actually, the whole idea of Ghost Eyes was based off of a novel that I really like set in San Francisco called The Girl with Ghost Eyes.
Yeah, cool. So just be happy I didn't eat none of your brains. Or suck your blood.
That kind of undead.
Oh.
I really appreciate it. Everyone gave me pretty open-ended characters for the most part. So it's Rob was like, I want to be in trouble for something, and having been had to leave my swamp for some reason. I was like, all right, well, what if you were exiled because of this failed battle? He's like, oh, that sounds great. And Shema's Rodrigo said, I want to be chasing down an artifact. I was like, all right, well, how about this is what the artifact does, because I can connect that to these other things. And then I was like, then I came up with the Renfield game and I basically came up with most of Alder's backstory for all the Fae connections.
Yeah, I basically said, okay, here's what happened to this character. This is why he doesn't remember his name. He was found literally on Russell Street, so they call him Russell. He, basically just stayed in San Francisco, growing and working in the monastery, learning a craft of woodworking. He never entered the Civil War, but he was hired to go work on different monasteries and places, and so that's why he's headed to redemption. And then Sam threw in, okay, here's this thing about Ghost Eyes, here's this thing about Mr. Palmer, who's hiring you to come down and build the temple, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So I thought it was a good collaboration.
Oh, thank you. And yeah, I was really, it's also one of those things where it's good for me to do work in advance, like I did with that list of all the major NPCs in Redemption, because that way I was able to keep them straight and had a nice Google Doc I could consult every time I was trying to check on someone's name, as opposed to having to make it up when you guys decide to go visit a bar or the general store.
Yeah. I kept mine right here in front of me the entire time. So that was good. Let's see. Everybody did their favorites. We talked about collaboration. Any other inspirations that went into this game, Sam?
So besides, so there are a few. The setting itself actually was based off of another series that I like, which is by R.S. Belcher. In the first book in that is called The Six Gun Tarot, and it is a weird Western book. And I read this book, and I was like, wow, this just feels so much like stepping into someone's Western setting role-playing game. It's just this really crazy town where crazy stuff is always happening, and the people there have this really interesting rapport with each other, and everyone's got these secrets and supernatural stuff going on. And so I decided to kind of steal a little bit from that. the character of Percy Miller is based off of Jay Gould, a pretty notorious robber baron. And his name is a combination of Percy, who is the vampire robber baron in the first issue of American Vampire, and Daniel Miller, was Jay Gould's father-in-law, who actually got him into railroad investing.
Wow, cool.
When did you decide on him having conquistador armor?
Pretty early. So that was another thing that I wanted. Another inspiration actually was was Warehouse 13. He was an occultist, which I'm pretty sure that class itself is basically based off of Warehouse 13. Like the idea is occultists are, rather than wizards where they study for their magic, or sorcerers where their magic is internal. Occultist power is basically all about having a bunch of magical artifacts and being able to channel their power in specific ways. And most of their occultist artifacts tend to be less about the local magical blacksmith made me a chest plate, breastplate +1, and more like this sword was in this specific war and therefore has these properties. And so then I spent a lot of time looking up random actual historical items that he could have around and that would be powerful to him. And then I had also done a bunch of research into the conquistadors' conflicts with the Aztecs and the Mexican Revolution, the Texas Revolution, and the Mexican-American War for the various vignettes that were in the swamp. Each of those represented a different conflict for the most part. Because that was also fun reading about history. It was just this one area on the Texas-Mexican border has just had every type of horrible bloodshed that could possibly happen over the past few hundred years happen there. So it's that's the best excuse I've ever heard of to have a haunted swamp.
Yeah. And I got to give a quick shout out to Nathan on Twitter as W Nathans. He has been doing a lot of the logo art for this off-season stuff. He did the Modern City logo that we had. He did the one for the Yellow Sign, the Call of Cthulhu game that we ran, and he did this one on super little information because I knew kind of what the setting was. I think we had recorded one episode, so I knew who all the characters were, and I was just like, hey, are you up for doing another logo? And he's like, yeah, sure. And I just threw out, here's the 6 keywords that you need to know. And he came up with the logo that we've been using for this game, and he's really good. So if you are looking for someone to do some logo work, look for W Nathans with an S on Twitter.
Cool.
Rodrigo, comments, questions, etc.?
Comments, questions. Hey, I got a question for you guys.
Uh-huh.
So, if you had it all to do all over again, Weird Western, Pathfinder, we all had lots of fun with these characters. What other character would you have pitched?
Mine would have been just a gunslinger guy.
Yeah, well.
Yeah, that was my other option, was just straight up gunslinger. Rowdy kind of guy.
See, I was going to say gunslinger.
Yeah, I wouldn't.
Yeah, I think that was everybody's second thing.
Because that's that's the one thing that as we got into the game, the first couple of encounters is pretty cool because I could do these really cool jump flying kicks, punch, take them out.
Mm-hmm.
But then as the game progressed, and it was oh, I'm going to get hit a lot because I have to get really up close to these guys. I kind of wish I had a gun. And so, yeah, if I would have probably had something that had a range attack on it.
I didn't get a gun. I would have really enjoyed. Sure, but it wasn't a gun. I would have really enjoyed playing kind of an amalgam of Doctor Strange and Brett Maverick, who was also female. Because the thing that kind of always floats around my head is someone who's a card sharp and people constantly underestimate her, but she's actually winning by magic and can also light you on fire. But, there's a lot of different issues with trying to play something like that, especially in a game like this, And this is the thing that I see for years and years and years now. I've been watching Rob struggle with being such an excellent character for situations where it's all about the talking and the interacting and all of the social type skills, and then also most of the time we end up dumped in a fight or stuck on a boat for 6 months and all of these things. And it just felt like, especially in a short term game, anything that I'd want to do with her would not actually end up happening. So you definitely want to have somebody who you can get that bang for your buck, theoretically speaking.
Did you figure something out, Rob?
Yeah.
You want to be a lizard man with a gun?
No, I actually didn't care about Gunslinger at all. Now, kind of depended on what character or what races Sam would have allowed. Was 100% where I came from. So when I got the lizard folk, it was straight up, I'm going to be very angry. But the other class that I kind of wanted to mess around with in Pathfinder is Summoner, but I figured that was more that we didn't need to deal with.
Yeah, pet casters can be complicated.
I probably would have wanted to play some kind of rat folk guy.
Rat folk?
Yes.
Oh, that'd been interesting.
Rat folk, really?
Yeah, I have an affinity.
Rodrigo, what about you?
I think I would have liked to. The other thing that I would have liked to explore some sort of like snake oil salesman.
That'd be a good one.
Professor Phineas T. Fate.
Would that have been? Would that have been a bard then, or what would that have been?
I was thinking about it the other day, and there's basically two ways that I could have gone with it. One of them is like Pathfinder explicitly has like an alchemist class.
Oh, okay.
Yep.
There you go.
So again, two ways to go with it. One, the snake oil actually works, and then you're an alchemist. And then the other one is like, I would have probably just like straight up been a rogue, and then the snake oil just doesn't work, and it's just like a high charisma, high dexterity rogue.
That's great.
Cool. Any other questions or comments from Rodrigo?
Nope, that's all I got.
All right.
It was lots of fun. I had a great time.
Thank you.
Matthew?
Did anyone have any questions for me about like plot elements or mechanics or anything like that?
There were mechanics?
There were lots of mechanics.
That's
Most
the
of
other
them
character I
hit
would
us
have
in the
played.
face.
A mechanic?
Yeah, play a mechanic.
The stable boy? I don't think I have any questions about
basically
plot
been
stuff.
Randus again.
How is that a mechanic?
Yeah, I feel
pretty much
most
the
of the
main
plot
reason.
stuff did work itself
Yeah.
out.
Yeah, I don't think that there were any unanswered questions by the end.
Good. Yeah, it's it was really a pleasure watching you guys figure things out. As
Yeah.
I
The
parsed
moment
out.
with the table is
Oh
just
my god, that was so good.
so horrifying.
I did. I had one question. Did we talk our way out of having a bard come with us on a fight?
Oh yeah, you totally did.
I
see.
knew it.
When?
What?
I knew it.
Your love interest was going to come with you and be a bard for a fight. She was a bard and was going to come with you.
I see.
It's like, I'll come and I'll help. No,
Oh.
you should stay. It's like, but everybody's fine here, and I have magic, and I can heal you. No. This is
now
something
you're
we
the
have
bard.
to
Sorry,
do.
yeah, the one I forgot what her name is already. The one who is like that you found injured and you saved, who was a bard and wanted to come with you, and because I thought you guys might need extra help in that fight because you definitely needed extra help in that fight. And I was like, okay, well.
Yep.
Oh, also in that fight, it was I in retrospect maybe not super clear. But one thing that I tried to make a big theme of it was like the physicality of magic. So I at least in that specifically, like I was describing a lot of like physical items that were like tied to trees or like thrown in your midst. And that was because you didn't have Dispel Magic yet. And I was creating an option for you to destroy those physical items and get rid of the spells, but you never did.
Yeah, we didn't get that.
We're
I'm
bad at
sorry.
hints.
We are really bad at hints.
Yes.
We're
There's no helping us.
yeah.
Well, no, the real problem is usually one or two of us will pick up on the hints and say something, and then everybody else will go, nah. And I think that in the time we've been doing Critical Hit, every one of us has been the person going, guys, should we maybe?
We take turns doing
Holding the
literally
idiot ball?
this. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's such fun when you're the one guy who knows, and then you're like, should I even? Nah.
Yeah.
Let's see where this ends. Oh, Randus lost an arm.
Yeah.
Maybe I should have said something.
Matthew, did you have any questions or comments?
I don't know about questions. I think my big comment, and one of the things that I really love, is when we do the thing and we rotate. The first time we did the other half, when Rodrigo intentionally gave us characters who were mechanically and thematically opposite.
Mm-hmm.
That was really cool. But I love that we've gotten to the point now where we just kind of run around and go, okay, I'm over here. Okay, you're over there. Well, I'm going to be over. Okay,
Right.
And like 2 episodes in, it was just like, okay, we're good. This is Texas. It's 1880. I'm also super magic. What are we going to do? Okay, this is. I really love how easy it was, and most of this, I think, is on Sam and the conceptualization of the game. But I really like how easy it was to just kind of walk into these whole new characters in this whole new setting, and have everybody just kind of go, "Here is my hat," and be like, "Yeah, I like that. I wish I was playing that. Dang, I want to play Russell." My favorite thing was,
and also to a large degree, just be like, oh well, I'm not gonna walk anywhere near that hat because that person wears it so well, right? It's like if you think about the Hanging Judge, it's like I was playing a guy who could be stealthy, and I was playing a guy who could be intimidating, and I was playing a guy who could be shooty, but I was like, Chema doesn't go anywhere near the Hanging Judge's wheelhouse.
Right.
Because that's his wheelhouse, thing. Right?
Yep.
Yeah.
Definitely. That's fun.
Yeah, and I really appreciated you guys like kind of doing the homework I gave you, and that you took those docs that had the NPCs and the locations and the history, and you clearly read them and referenced them, so that when I described a character, because Rob got his very own, that was just every lizard person of note before we showed up in his swamp, and you guys were super on about just like, oh, it's this person and that's my relationship with this person, and I just loved some of like the role playing that went on with people and how they decided they felt about different NPCs.
Mm-hmm.
Lizard people.
That's good. Being from out of town, I like my homework was like tiny.
Mm-hmm.
So I got like almost none of that. And like most of it was mostly Sam being like, hey, come up with an NPC for this. And I was like, okay, here's a guy.
His name's Eddie.
I would say that first sheet before the game started, I had 2 characters. I had Alder and I had the one other contact person, and that was it.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's what I think. Everybody had a different info packet because,
Yes.
for those of us that were in, Alder, Russell, and the Hang Judge all had a list of basically everyone who was in the town.
Yep.
That was notable, including the ever elusive August Weskerly. So that we knew, here's the people of this town, so that when they come up in conversation, here's what you know about them. And I found that super, super helpful.
Whereas I was like, well, I find this person and he may help. Okay.
Yeah. Sam, can you send me a copy of that?
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
I just like to see it because I didn't get to see it because I'm not from town.
Sure. Not a problem.
No, you don't get
Happy
to. No.
Well, there's and that would be fine if you don't want to alter my memory of it, but
No.
it's always in because you can as a game master, your dramatis persona does a lot of work for you.
Yeah.
You can actually it really does. You can do a lot of work as a game master is misleading your players.
Yes.
Yeah, just flat out lying.
And just through your dramatis persona, you can do a lot of work at basically planting these misconceptions for your players so that you can surprise them later, and that can do a lot of work for you.
Yeah, absolutely. I was super happy kind of early when I felt like, particularly Chema, but also to some degree some of the other players were suspicious of Palmer, and because I'd put him on equal footing with Miller in the Dramatis, and they're like, oh, he's super powerful and he's rich and he's influential and he's like got his guy got murdered, and it's like, yeah, he's just a total red herring.
He's dirty, I tell you, he's dirty.
Brian, did you have any questions or comments?
No, it was a lot of fun. It was a good experience. I don't know.
Okay. Rob, what about you?
Rob's asleep.
No, I had a couple
playing
questions
Ishin
just a
at the
little bit
moment.
ago. Yeah.
Make a noise so we know you're alive.
Why South Carolina, Matthew? Or was that
South
Sam's
Carolina?
doing?
That's where he is from. He's from South Carolina.
Yes.
Well, actually, the North Carolina, South Carolina joke came to me because I forgot. The first time I said it wrong, and I'm like, oh, yeah. But the South Carolina thing, that is in the backstory. And a lot, and by a lot, I mean probably most because I was terrible, about helping with the backstory. Sam gave me just tons of really cool stuff. So, yeah, the South Carolina thing was in there. I just like it.
I picked South Carolina mostly because it was, a site of a lot of Civil War fighting, and because I didn't want him to be too close to home, because there were going to be enough characters that were dealing with like family issues, and I didn't want him to be like trying to, and I wanted to threaten his mother, but without making it easy for him to go to her. So I thought that was basically and that I was going to I really wanted to have a cactus dryad, so I kind of had her be like the proxy for showing the personal threat of it.
Cactus dryad, just such a cool.
The entire dryad thing was awesome.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, I really like plants, and had been to a botanic garden pretty recently, and had just been thinking about alternate dryads because by the book they're technically all like one type of tree, which I always thought was really silly, because there's so many trees, and then you could have so many different cool looking dryads. So
yeah, on top of the fact that not all trees grow everywhere.
Yeah, exactly. So that means like what you only have, like I can't even remember if it's like birch or I forgot like what tree it is that's supposed to, but like you have regional things. And then I also came up with the whole idea of like hags being corrupted dryads, and that that was just I looked at both. Well, so when Rob pitched me, I want to be from a swamp, I was like, all right, well, what kind of threats could you have in a swamp? I'm like, well, green hags, they're a classic. And then I was like, and maybe I can have dryads and they can be like in conflict. And then I looked at both of their stat blocks and I was like, wow, they've got like the same exact spell-like abilities. And I was like, all right, they're the same thing.
Yep.
It's that was great. And it's a great example of the stats informing the story, which is something that is kind of like very unique to role-playing games and to running to the storytelling of role-playing games, and is basically the idea behind Eberron. Period. It's like as a game or as a setting. When they were writing Eberron, they were like, "What's stupid about D&D 3.5?" Like, and that's why Eberron exists at all, and that's why it's like compelling. So it's like all of those little things, like those little ideas. It's like the classic thing in like my game of like, well, elves make everybody uncomfortable immediately as soon as they enter the room. It's like, why? It's like, well, because elves give everybody a +1 to perception. It's like, well, that's why. It's like it's just this little line that's written in the rules, but it actually gives you this like little bit of information that actually creates a moment, or that actually gives you a story. Like that's this bit of rules text that somebody can find, and it can actually create. Basically, you can spin a whole game out of, and Sam basically did that. She like. Created a significant portion of this game out of this, like, bit of stats that probably nobody else has ever noticed.
Yep.
Sam, how much prep time did you have on this? Because I think we gave you I know that from the time that we ended the Void Saga season with Rodrigo to the time that we started playing your game was 8 weeks, because that's when we were running. Well, not quite 8 weeks, maybe a month.
Mm-hmm.
How much had you already prepared before you knew that you were going to be running this game, and then how much was, I've got 4 months or 4 weeks to get this done? How much of that 4 weeks did you use up?
Well, there were some initial emails going back and forth about what you even wanted me to run, because I'd proposed some alternate. I knew I wanted to run Pathfinder, so I had shown you guys a few options, like 2 settings within the classic Galarian setting where I'd be making stuff up, and then 2 modules that Pathfinder has put out, and then there was this weird Western setting. And I was able to know a little bit about that the setting would work, because actually after I read the book, that Six Gun Tarot book, my husband Kevin also read the book, and then he ran a one-shot, which then became a multi-shot. And for a while we were racing about which of us was going to finish our own weird Western games first. So, we took very different approaches to it. And it's funny that, Rodrigo, you were talking about it on Alchemist, because that's actually what I played in his version of it, and it worked really well. But I did a fair amount of prep before the game started, because with an intrigue plot like this was, I needed to know where it was going from the beginning, because I needed to be able to seed clues along the way. And so I had the first few combats ready to go, and I had basically the whole outline. A lot of times I wrote say the cutscenes often a week before, or would finish working on bigger combats pretty close up to the time. But I knew ahead of time what was going on, what each person's deal was. I had ideas for at this point, what is this NPC doing, and how will that affect redemption, and how will that affect perdition, and what kind of clues could people pick up on if they made relevant checks, so that the information was slowly bleeding out to let you guys figure it out.
Mm-hmm. All right. Anybody else have anything else to say? Sam, do you have any questions or comments for us?
No, I really thank you guys all for playing, and thank you for giving me an opportunity to run this. This was it was a lot of fun. It was never run a game for a podcast before, so it was very exciting. And
how was that? How was running a public game?
Oh, I was so scared before the first session, just so nervous. Because this is actually the longest game I've ever run. And the first non-module game that I've ever run to completion. So I was nervous about that in general, and really nervous about how it would be received, because there's so much. The listeners have there's a high bar that's been set for the listeners, and I didn't want people to be disappointed. And this was an original setting, and it wasn't a pretty typical D&D setting, so I was scared. And then when I was getting feedback, it had been almost entirely supportive, and I really appreciated it. And it's so funny, because it's also one of the things that made me want to take the best notes, is because I knew if I hand wave something, it's I forgot what that guy's name is, whatever, let's change it. In a normal tabletop game, that's fine. But when there's actually a recording of people, it's hey, that person had blue eyes and was named Gus. I was well, I have to actually keep things consistent. And the other thing that is super tough when running an intrigue plot is I have to make it so that you guys don't figure it out too early, and that any of the many thousands of listeners don't figure it out too early and decide to post in the comment section. I had a guy email me. It was hey, I'm thinking of running my own weird Western game, and I was wondering if I could borrow the Renfield gang. I'm yeah, that's fine. What are you going to do with them? He's well, And this was like way before the Miller reveal. It's like, I was thinking of having them secretly work for a vampire. I'm like, that's great. Good work.
That's a good idea, dude. You
Yeah.
should run with that.
Yep.
Yeah.
That actually, like, in the Void Saga, in this main critical hit game that happens all the time.
Yeah.
Like, people. The good thing though is that we get so many just not so off the wall theories that they drown people out. Like, if there's ever like a mystery or something that the players are trying to find out, I'm usually pretty good about, sometimes these guys will figure it out, with a little bit of in advance, so that I can just like watch things like wash over everybody's face, and they're like, "Oh no, I can't believe it!" Just in time to have it matter. But sometimes we have clever listeners, and they'll just like super figure it out ahead of time, and I'll just be like, I won't answer, just like I don't answer when somebody is like, "I bet that Orem is the vampire," and has been all along.
Blah blah.
Yeah.
So that helps. It does help that we have so many crazy theories rolling around.
Well,
it helps to like drown out when somebody totally nails it.
Yeah, and I have a theory about that. Some of it is people get it just right away before the rest of us.
Mhm.
But some of it is truly that our listeners go back and listen to the episodes multiple times. So, like, for example, when we were playing Void Saga, and in the second to last season before this one, which was the Lords of the Feywild,
Yep.
when Orem's jumping around and his powers are out of whack, I think that's the season, right? And
No, when you're like dimension hopping.
Yeah, no, I don't know if it's dimension hopping. When I'm doing my face step, and I go and I see there's this like desert scape, and then way off in the distance there's like this jackal walking, and then you come back, and us playing this at the time, we're just like, okay, Rodrigo's got a little vision quest thing that pops up. Okay, we're moving along until we get to the point where I'm editing that episode knowing what happens with the plague jackal, and I'm like, oh, that was told so long ago, and it's only because I'm listening to it again with things that are coming up. And I think that with our listeners, I think that they're listening to things multiple times. And so things that for us are just real fleeting because we're playing this game week to week to week and we're just always moving forward. We don't have time to go back and re-listen. And when people re-listen, they pick up on those subtle hints and details.
Well, and there's also something to be said for being in it. Like, you guys are keeping track of a lot of stuff. You're keeping track of your stats, and you're actually in it. You're like living it. So even if you totally catch the clues and you're like writing them down and you're like, okay, like there's something to be said for the fact that you're like, it's happening in real time for you.
Yeah.
Being relaxed, like listening to this, you like listening to it multiple times. It's a lot easier to piece things together. And then, the other thing is like, I think also out there are people that are, there's a reason like this crew is, is a good crew because we don't all think alike. And I think somewhere out there's probably some people that think a little bit more than like Sam. There's some people that think out a little bit more like me. So when it's like, oh no, the party has been split up, there's somebody out there who was like, I bet Rodrigo's going to put like those clerics in with half the party. And, that person totally nailed it before I did the big reveal that, half the party's going to go with some of the holy guys and the other half of the other holy guys. And, it's like everybody was freaking out about it.
Yeah.
It's like somebody totally called it.
All right. Well.
Yeah. It was particularly tough running for you, Rodrigo, I've got to say, because you are sharp. Like, you would just pick up on things early. Like, I remember in, like, almost one of the first scenes, like, Russell shows up and he's like, oh, I got a horse from Mr. Palmer. And you're like, one of the richest guys in town just gave you a horse. He's like, yeah, I do carpentry work for him. Like, sure, that's a good reason for you to have a horse. And like, it's like, yes, you're right. Like, he's got extra special reasons to like be helping Russell out that Russell doesn't even know about, but like you picked up on that, and I thought that was great.
Yeah.
I will say, like, I really enjoyed this game, Sam, in particular, because you totally shook me a couple times. Like, I do think of myself as a sharp player, and there were times when I was like, okay, well, I'm just gonna keep an eye on Eshin because he's cursed. And you were like, well, your powers don't quite work that way, and blah blah blah. And I'm like, yeah, that makes sense. Okay, Eshin, go over there. And it's like, Eshin's been kidnapped, and I'm like, oh, Sam totally shook me. She got me off the trail. I don't believe it.
So a little bit behind the curtain on the Russell curse was so early on I knew I wanted to have these ghosts attack you guys in the inn. And then early on, Eshin establishes like, oh, I don't sleep with the crew inside. I sleep outside. I'm like, well, that's going to make this whole ambush in the inn a lot more tricky because like either he's not going to be part of the combat or he's going to have to like sit out the half the combat to like get to the crew. I was like, all right, I need to come up with a way to get him inside. And then it was like, then you guys failed your saves against the what I
curse or whatever that I had.
Ghost tetanus.
Yeah.
And then because of the fact that Dampier, one of the variation of Dampier that I was using for you, they have a weakness anyways, where like anything that is ability score damage related or negative energy related, they have a harder time with. I was like, sure, that's good enough. He's still cursed, and you, Mr. made out of meat and life energy, have to babysit him to keep him from being cursed. There you go. Now everyone's in the inn.
Yeah.
Smart thinking.
So that was just all to get us run over by a train.
Yeah.
Yes.
And I don't know if we talked about it in show or not. Sam and her husband actually had a bet on whether she'd get all of us or not with that train.
Wow.
Yeah, I call my Kevin is a very experienced DM, and he was as you put it, my wartime consigliere on this game. We talked a lot about fights and combats and balancing encounters and stuff like that. So he helped me a fair bit with the delicate balance between I want this person to be scary but not actually to kill you. But then there was always I felt like I had a pretty good read on how you would react to things, which was always funny because he never agreed. So I was like, oh, well, so then they're going to walk into this room and they're going to shoot the loyal Lade who's disguised as Miller. He's like, you really think they're gonna like just shoot him and not talk to him? I'm like, oh yeah, 100%.
Yeah. Well,
it's a good thing I didn't rage.
Yeah. Yep.
That would have been just a corpse.
I was really happy with that because I feel like a lot of times in D&D, illusionists tend to just be DC casters. Like their whole deal is how do I get the highest save I can on Phantasmal Killer and then kill you with this spell. And then they just kind of feel like necromancers, but with illusions. And I wanted to have an illusionist that was actually an illusionist. So
very cool. Well, I hope everyone enjoyed that look at the Weird Western and our final thoughts on that game. It was certainly a lot of fun, and I appreciate everyone who has shared their positive comments with us over at the comment section over at majorspoilers.com or over on the podcast app from iTunes and all those other good things. We have yet another game to run before we get back into the Void Saga, and Brian is once again stepping up to the DM chair. And the next game we are playing is what?
It's called Urban Shadows.
Urban Shadows. What is it? Well, you'll find out next week on Critical Hit. Guys.
On Critical Hit!
There you go.
I'm out of practice.
On Critical Hit.
And yet you were the only one who got it.
Yes.
We never do next week. We always just do last time.
On Critical Hit.
On Critical Hit.
See?
Yeah! Woo! Yeah!
All right, everybody, that wraps it up for this show. Thank you so much again for downloading and listening. If you found some value in this show, then please head over to patreon.com/majorspoilers. Sign up. Your small monthly contribution offsets the cost of all of the equipment, all of the server costs, all of the other headaches and hassles that we go through each and every week when we produce this show for you. And the best thing is when you sign up at patreon.com/majorspoilers, you get a bunch of extra things, which I think is kind of neat. Extra podcasts, extra videos, behind-the-scenes stuff, and a whole lot more. It's all over at patreon.com/majorspoilers. Thank you so much once again, and until next time, here's hoping all of your dice rolls are critical hits.
This podcast is copyright 2017 by Major Spoilers Entertainment, LLC.